we're going to ask Sue a few questions about Standard 3 today. Standard 3 in the Quality Matters rubric is about assessment and making sure that the assessment relates back to the outcome that we're trying to measure. And the first substandard, I am going to ask Sue to talk a little bit about that first substandard, which is really about that connection, that alignment.
One of the things you have to do right up front is make sure your standards is asking about assessment and measurement, but how does that fit into your academic program? With our curriculum, since we're nationally accredited, we have to provide data, valid measurements that our students are working on understanding concepts in commercial recreation. Mm-hmm. For the module that I've developed as part of the Quality Matters group is one dealing with business, commercial recreation business feasibility, mm-hmm. Dealing with some legal issues that may be part of that, finding out about how they differentiate themselves from other competition, and lastly, looking at how they design their image or part of the marketing pieces. Mm-hmm. So the standard wants them to learn how to analyze the commercial recreation business for those three things.
Right.
And what we did is we wrote the outcome, and it's listed as one of those in our syllabi. It matches up to a national standard also that we have to meet for accreditation. But the outcome is using that action type thing of analyzing mm-hmm. those pieces.
Terrific.
So what we ultimately want them to do is to actually go out and look at a real world business, and that's the ultimate project that
Great.
Matches up to that standard.
Super. Now, in the substandard 2, mm-hmm. 3.2, you're looking at the grading policy. How do you tell students what the grading policy is in your course?
Well, based on Quality Matters, you need to make it up front, first of all, in the syllabi, what they are going to learn, and it matches up with all your outcomes. But also, we take it and break it down for them. I put a table and I'll say, you have these assignments, what dates they're due, and what their point values are. Now, some people like to take and use 100% and take all those projects and say, this one's worth 5%, this one's whatever, and then you got to put more points in there. I look at it this way: if it's 750 points for the whole semester in this project, the more in detail it is, the more points it is. So it might be a 200 or 300 point project. So I let them know that up front in that, mm-hmm. in the syllabus. Then I also indicate to them that there'll be more details about the content, how to put it together as it comes up in the actual assignments that are in the module itself.
Great. And that really takes us to the next substandard 3.3, which is about the criteria you use to judge how the students did, or how you're going to tell them how they, what they want to pay attention to as they mm-hmm. do their work. So how do you do that?
Well, part of it is that you need to get them, first of all, oriented to whatever the reading assignments are. So what I do is I have some chapter questions. Those are worth like maybe 5 points mm-hmm. towards their final grade. But it's to get them to read the materials, to make sure they've read them and they've picked up the key concepts. So, because once they understand those, then we can move on to what I call the scenario, where I give them a particular business. In this case, I often use some of the local commercial recreation businesses, so they can go out and visit with those mm-hmm. people. They can mm-hmm. go out and check them out. They may have used those services. And take those, again, getting them to take those concepts of what is their marketing image, what are they trying to do to make? Mm-hmm. Why are they mm-hmm. successful? Mm-hmm. Taking the concept of how do they differentiate themselves from, say, within a 60-mile radius sure. of the community, and getting them to look at that scenario and say, how would you go about doing it, or what is their thing? Again, keep going back to those initial concepts that they picked up in the reading assignments.
Sure.
Finally, getting to that final project, the criteria expands in the field trip. I come up with a rubric for them, so many points for each question, getting them to go into the detail so that it's looking at it from a much more depth. And at this point, they should be able to analyze and give me examples, critically explain that this is a good concept or a good way they do their business and such.
Great. So they're going to be able to see exactly what you're looking for
Exactly.
and know how you were going to grade their work.
Right.
That's terrific.
And it's all up front for them.
Terrific. Now, in the next substandard, we talk about the not the criteria, but the variation of your assessments. So how do you do that? It's so easy to get into a rut sometimes when we're building an online course and do the same things over and over. So what do you think about as you're trying to keep varied strategies for assessment?
I look at it as it's kind of a spiral effect, that the assignment should become more complex. They should be looking for more in-depth information from them. So instead of just going like, a lot of people like, well, I just give them 5 multiple choice tests. No, that doesn't work. What you're looking at is multiple strategies. So the first questions could be just basically seeing if they read the material, so it's pretty much somewhat regurgitation of what the authors pointed out. That's one level. But then we go to the next level with the scenario. Okay, what did the author tell you about, or the text that you had to read, or some of the outside readings I may have given you, about what are the best practices? Now, how do I apply them in a scenario? I might have a business. If I'm going to start up a local business, sometimes I've used that question as part of the scenario. What are you going to have to be aware of in the local community? Or I give them a geographical area. So they've got to go out and research it. So that takes it to another level. And finally, the last level is they're actually analyzing, which is very in-depth, based on a series of questions that they should have kind of as guidelines, is the way I look at them.
Sure.
But you've got to give me back the detail. You can't just go in and get a yes or no answer to the question.
Right.
You've got to talk to the owner of the business you've selected, and you need to take and analyze, is this the best practice based on what I'm reading in the context of current literature?
Sure.
And then think a little bit about how I might improve it, because there's some questions there is, how would you consider it being better? How would you make it better than what they're doing? So it gives them to look at the pros and cons of how someone's actually running a business.
Sure.
The other thing I like to do is make sure it's something that I let them select what is of interest to them. So that way they bring it back to something that they're interested in that. Because we have several students that sometimes say, well, I want to go out and start my own business. So they get a kind of a overview of what that is.
Okay.
So that field trip, then the thing I make them do, though, is report those reports on the discussion list. Everybody gets to see what you visited, because some of them go home on the weekend or do it at a local business at home, just to get the variety. And then have the peers take and comment on whether they thought they reported everything or what questions they might ask.
Okay.
So as to get them to interact a little bit with each other.
Sure, and give each other peer assessment.
Right, peer assessment too. So it's a real, I like to see as a laddering or like a spiral process, so that they get more and more in depth and difficulty in what they have to produce as a report.
Sure. Now, the last substandard is really going to seem simple after you've taken them to this level of assessment, but it's more of a self-check. How do you do that? How do you build that into your module?
Well, by using that peer interaction is one way of self-check, and say, well, they didn't seem to answer this question, or why didn't they get this?
Okay.
So it's all out there for everybody to look at. As I do in each of the assignments, I personally go through, and in the assignment box, I will give them feedback on specific questions. Did you consider this?
Okay.
On those chapter questions? What is it that you might have missed, or did you not review this? Sometimes you pick up on things. The scenario, it gets to start giving them some early feedback on how to do an analysis.
Okay.
Is one of the key things to pick up on.
Great.
So the feedback all the way through the process, and ultimately the course has a requirement that they have to work with 2 or 3 of their peers. They're going to produce a proposal for an actual commercial recreation plan. So as you go through all our modules, what you're doing is you're hitting on all the key components of that final business plan.
Okay, that makes
so
sense.
it's a building and it's a feedback in a situation. We give them a chance to. I say to them, if you have any questions at any time, send me what you which you're interested in or you seem stuck on.
Sure, so you can give them feedback through that process.
Exactly.
Terrific. Well, that really is key to satisfaction also for students to get that timely, ongoing feedback from their instructor. So I appreciate your modeling that for us. And thanks again for being here today.